Theory lesson 2 on the piano keyboard, and we're carrying on with the black keys. Let's get into it.
So why is it important to know the black keys or the other notes on a piano keyboard? Well, by knowing all the notes you have available to you, your playing will sound more refined and more polished, whether it's on the piano or on the guitar. We do want to, in fact, eventually get to know every single fret of every single string on our guitar, and that's why it's important that we know what we're doing and where we are when we're on a certain fret of a certain string. Popular songs are written in many different keys these days. Knowing your keys and which sharps or flats belong in a certain song can help you learn songs much faster. There are lots of times where you don't just have the regular A B C D E F G notes in a song. And lastly, when you're working in a pro gig in a professional setting, people will be speaking in musically intelligent terms. They'll be talking about, the singer can't play it in the key of G, so let's move it down in the key of F. And you want to be able to know what they're talking about so you can quickly change your music and adapt accordingly. So how do the black keys in fact work? Well, we have our 7 letters, A through G, and we use sharp and flat symbols next to these letters to indicate a note which has been raised or lowered by a half step. When we talk about a half step, we mean a note that is immediately adjacent to the note you're talking about, up or down. Every black key has a name associated with each of those white keys that are beside it. So we're going to zoom in for just a moment on this keyboard. Let's go about there. And I'm going to grab my pen. And first of all, let's reacquaint ourselves with the white keys. We have to know our bass line. We find the letter C to the left of any pair of black keys. So our letter C is right here. From there, we know we go forward through the alphabet, C, D, E, F, G. All review stuff, nothing to it. And we can, of course, go down as well, B, A, G, etc. So we have the white keys labeled, and of course now we need to move on to the black keys. How do we label these black keys? Well, let's take a specific key, for example. Let's take this guy right here. It's right between the notes C and D. The first thing we're going to talk about are the sharp keys. Now, all of these black keys can be named with 2 names, a flat name and a sharp name. We're going to start with the sharp keys and label them as such. We know that this key right here is between C and D. A sharp sign basically means that we take a note and we raise it a half step, or raise it a semitone, or for guitar purposes, raise it 1 fret on the guitar. That means this black key can in fact be called C sharp. We use that sharp sign to indicate that it's not just the regular C, it's the C that has been sharpened. It's been raised by a half step. The same premise goes for all the black keys all the way across. Here was the C. C sharp is a half step above. Here's the D note. So D sharp would be right here, 1 half step above, or the very next note. Okay? This black key, what would we call it? Well, it's F sharp. We'd give it the name F sharp. We'd carry on in this fashion. G sharp would be found right above. Here's our G sharp. And of course this one, you can follow the pattern. This is an A sharp. The black keys down here on the bottom, they're of course repetitions of what you had up here. It's the same 3 black keys, they were just in a lower octave. So these ones of course would also be F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp. So there you go, you have the whole keyboard labeled. Every single key has a name, and you can find any key you want by knowing exactly what these notes are. But hang on a second, these black keys can also have other names. Now, your first question might be, why would you possibly need other names for these black keys? They already have a name, why would I give it two different names? Well, for musical grammar purposes, sometimes you have to call these black keys something else. And this is where the flat symbol comes in. I told you before how each black key has two names, and it's associated with the keys, the white keys on either side. So this black key here is called C sharp. It's also called D flat. So I would also give this black key its label D flat. Okay, that system, of course, carries on. What's the flat name I would give to this note? It is E flat. I give it an E label with a flat sign. Carrying on, here's a G flat, here would be an A flat, and this would be a B flat, and these guys are, of course, repetitions of what you have above, A flat and B flat. So those are the names of the black keys, both names for all the black keys. I'm going to grab this keyboard and bring it down a little bit to remind ourselves of that second point. Every black key has a name associated with each of the white keys beside it. Have a quick look again. This black key right here is called C something and D something, both notes that are right beside it. Okay, it's C sharp and D flat. This black key is called D sharp and E flat. The same process carries on. This note is a half step above the F, so we call it F sharp. It's a half step below the G, so we call it G flat. Now we've just introduced two new symbols into your musical vocabulary. We've introduced the sharp and we've introduced the flat. The sharp sign is essentially just the pound key, or in more modern terms, it's of course your hashtag when you're doing stuff online. The flat symbol basically looks like an inverted or sort of a skewed lowercase b. Okay, we're going to start using these in the music a little bit as we move forward with our playing. But when it comes to knowing the names of the black keys, how do you know which symbol is used for what direction? Well, you have two symbols. One raises a note, one lowers a note. You'll see that this key here, for example, is a G sharp. It's a G that has been raised a half step. Or it's also an A flat. It's an A that has been lowered a half step. The sharp sign meaning something that is raised. If you want to come up with a little mnemonic device for yourself or a little trick, the one that works for me is, I think that if something is sharp, it has a point to it. It is raised. It comes out of the texture. It's sharp. It has a point. So it's up. It's up, up, up. The flat symbol, think of the word itself. If something is flat, think of a flat tire. If you have a flat tire, it's riding low. It's down. It's to the left on the keyboard. So great, I now know what all the notes on the keyboard are. What does this have to do with me and my guitar? Well, again, you can translate your knowledge of the keyboard onto the guitar, onto the fretboard, by visualizing the keyboard as a key map, where each piano key is one fret on the guitar. You'll recall from a previous lesson that we talked about this E string, for example. If when you play that open E string, you're playing, let's say, this E note on the keyboard. That's the sound. The same sound on the keyboard is that open E string. As you move forward up through the piano, you're going one fret up on the keyboard. So your F note is one half step. It's the very next key, which means on the guitar, you're going to have F located at the first fret. This is just review from previous lessons, right? From your F, if you need to find G, you have to go up 1, 2 more frets to find that G note. Or from the open E string, 1, 2, 3 whole frets, or 3 whole half steps. So we're going to go from the open E string, 1, 2, 3. Right here is where we would find our G note. And you could, of course, carry on with that pattern. From G, how do we get to A? We have to go 1, 2 more keys, or on the guitar, 1, 2 more frets, and this would be our A. So what do we find in these frets that we haven't played yet? Well, here is where exists our black keys. Between F and G, you would find what note? Well, on the keyboard, you can see that it's F sharp and G flat. Now, what would you call it? Well, it depends on the musical environment you're in, but this note you can call it F sharp and you can call it G flat. For our purposes, either or is the same. This guy right here, using the same logic, of course, what would you call it? It's one fret higher than a G, one fret lower than an A. If it's one fret higher than a G, it's a G that has been flattened or sharpened. Well, if it's higher, it has a point, it's the sharp. G sharp, and of course, if it's G sharp, it is A flat. It's an A that has been lowered. It's an A that's riding low. Now, if you would rather not worry about the piano keyboard at all as a visualization tool and just use the guitar itself, that's fine as well. Just remember that between all our letters A through G, all adjoining letters are 2 frets apart except for B and C and E and F. Other than that, you are always going to take an entire step. You're going to take 2 frets of a jump to get from one letter to the next. That means, let me just grab a wide tip pen here, and I can show you that from E to F is going to be 1 fret away, because that's one of our conditions. Other than that, you're going to have 2 frets between every single letter. We just found F. Here's where we could find G. Here's where we find A. Here's where we find B. And C is going to be right next door because of our rule. We can carry on with that system through all our strings. If you have an A on that fifth string, you know that B will be 2 frets away. B to C, however, is one of our catches, so we're going to have C right next door. Where would you find D? It's 2 frets. E is another 2 frets. E to F is one of our catches, so we're going to be right beside. On our G string, our D string, from D to E, that's 2 frets. E to F is 1 fret. F to G is 2 frets. G to A is 2 frets. A to B is 2 frets. And B to C is 1 fret. On the G, the 3rd string, G to A is 2 frets. A to B is 2 frets. B to C is 1 fret. C to D is 2. D to E is 2, and E to F is just 1. On the B string, we're starting with a half step immediately because you have B and C. They are 1 fret away. So B to C, there's your C note right there. We're going to carry on with 2 frets until we hit that next instance of B to C or E to F. So we found our C note right here on the 1st fret. We'd go up 2 frets for D, 2 frets for E, 1 fret for F, 2 frets for G, 2 frets for A. And on our last E string, this will be the same pattern as the pattern we have on our low E string. From E, we would find F 1 fret away. G is 2 frets away. A is 2 frets. A to B is 2 frets. B to C is only 1 fret because it's one of our rules. And C to D is, of course, 2 frets away. Same as, I forgot to fill this at the bottom, but you would have this as well. Okay? So without having to worry about the piano keyboard per se, you can focus strictly on the guitar itself, but just remember, B and C, E and F, those are the only spots where you are only 1 fret away. Everything else is 2 frets. So what you have in front of you now, you have a guitar fretboard where all these black marks I've indicated are your basic letter names. What about all those frets that we haven't marked yet? Well, this is where, of course, you would find the quote-unquote black keys, the accidental notes, the sharps and flats. Let me grab a slightly thinner pen here, and we can jump right into naming some of these notes. Okay, so let's take, for example, our D string. Here's D, here's E. What comes in between? It's a D that's been raised or an E that's been lowered. If I call it a D something, I would call it a D sharp. If I called it an E something, I would call it an E flat. It's an E that's been lowered. It's an E that's riding low, so it's an E flat, or it's a D sharp. Let's go to the B string over here. Second fret of the B string. What note on earth could that possibly be? It's my B string. C is at the first fret. D is at the third fret. So between C and D, what would I find? I would find C what? C raised, C with a point, C sharp. And of course I would also find D flat. This note, second fret of the B string, would also be called D flat. You can of course carry on that pattern for all these as yet unnamed frets on the guitar.